After a jump in consumers turning to notes and coins for daily spending, some major high street chains and restaurants are being challenged by campaigners over their refusal to accept cash. Ron Delnevo, who is chair of the Payment Choice Alliance, which campaigns for the long-term future of cash services, said it was completely unacceptable that some stores are rejecting cash. And as it happens, Ron Delnevo, chair of the Payment Choice Alliance, is on the line now. Good evening, Ron.
Good evening, Nick.
You know, I can't remember the last time I left the house with any cash. I just don't think of it anymore. Isn't cash going to eventually go the same way as checks? They had their time, and that time is over.
Not at all. Checks are still used, by the way. They haven't died out entirely. So it's something that the financial services industry tries to pretend when it doesn't want something to exist. It pretends it will go away. They said that about checks 20 years ago, but checks are still used today. And with cash, a huge number of people in the UK use cash still. Over 40 million people use cash regularly in the UK. So it's not going away unless it's forced to go away and the public are forced to accept cashlessness. And we don't believe that should be allowed, frankly.
Well, I wonder how many people actually use checks, though. I mean, you could say that people still barter with chickens. I'm sure it still happens, but does anybody really...
Not on a high street near me, but people do use cash in every high street near me. I think, we have to firstly say we didn't invent this preference people have to continue using cash. We went out and asked the public, and we found that only 3% of people, and you may be one of those 3%, Nick, a very unusual person, do not use cash at all. And alternatively, 71%, which equates to 40 million British adults, said they wanted a law put in place saying that their cash must be accepted. So the public are very keen on cash. Banks and some credit card and other companies may not be, but the public still want to use cash.
Yes, I've read that statistic, that 71% said that they would like to be able to use cash. But when it comes down to it, they don't, though, do they? 2.6% of us use cash for day-to-day spending. I mean, it might be that 71% say that they would like the option, but if they don't use the option, then if only 2.6% of us do, then that just seems like a lot of faff for companies to have to go through to provide
Nick,
the facility
I don't know where
using
you got
cash.
That percentage. I don't know where you got that percentage of 2.6, but actually nearly 50% of people use cash very regularly. The British public spent over £130 billion of cash last year. And for the people who do use cash, that amounts to around about £3,700 each. So, yes, of course, some people have stopped using cash. Some people have stopped using their common sense. But the vast majority of people want to go on using cash. 16 million people in this country budget using cash. That's more than one person for every two households. We have 13 million people over 65, many of whom don't own smartphones. They can't use apps and other clever payment methods. They want to go on using cash. I could go through the stats, but basically when you add it all up, the vast majority of the British public still use cash to some extent, and a lot of people use cash for a lot of different purchases. But the point is, we've had cash for 2,100 years in this country, and why is that? Because it works for people. And when Link, the ATM operators, asked the public, do you want to have the option of using cash? And that was only last August. Over 80% said yes. So, leave aside that, it doesn't suit the banks and it doesn't suit MasterCard and Visa. We're always fighting to make it a cashless society. If the public wants something to continue, why shouldn't the public have their way? Why should some businesses, be allowed to actually impose something on the public they don't want? That's fundamentally wrong. Are we in a democracy? Or are we in a dictatorship where technology rules us rather than being our servant?
Well, it's an interesting argument you make, because some might say it's the other way around, that you are trying to dictate to businesses how they conduct their affairs. If a business doesn't want to deal in cash because of all sorts of reasons. I mean, they've got to keep afloat. They've got to go to the bank with cash, a large amount of money, the day's takings. There's a risk of theft. It's more likely to be subject to mistakes. It's dirty. I mean, cash is a pain. Why shouldn't businesses be able to decide for themselves whether they want to take cash or not?
2 million people in this country said that they were subject to online identity theft in 2023. That is massive compared to a little bit of theft maybe associated occasionally with cash. Anyway, can I just ask you a question, Nick? Do you think the people of Britain are entitled to less rights than the people of our European neighbours? Would you think that was reasonable?
No, but would you think that it's reasonable for outsiders to dictate to businesses how they run their affairs?
This isn't outsiders, this is the public stating their preferences. In every one of our European neighbours, France, Spain, Denmark, Norway and so on, Belgium as well, they have put laws in place or strengthened their constitutions where they have a written constitution to say that cash must be accepted. We are outliers. The British public are being treated badly. Why do we deserve to be treated badly? If you choose personally, Nick, to leave home without any cash, that's your choice, and I respect that. But why should the rest of the public, many of whom want to continue using cash, have cashless imposed on them? It's not being imposed on them in France or Spain or Belgium or these other countries. We are outsiders in a negative way.
All right, but people who run businesses, they're people too. Can't they decide how they run their business?
Well, you have to make a choice here. All these other countries have made the choice that the public must come first when it comes to payment choice. What you're saying is we're so unusual in this tiny small island
No, I'm not.
that we should be different and businesses should have their whim. Well, it's not right.
You know, there are differences in laws between us and our European neighbours and all sorts of things. I mean, they've legalised cannabis to some extent, all of them. And we determined that the war on drugs is something that can be won. I mean, you know, there's differences between countries. I just wonder why
people smoke cannabis illegally, but we don't want to force cash underground. We're not talking about prohibition here. The reality is there's a very simple thing. Ask the public what they want. You know, we asked that with Brexit, and 52% of people said they wanted to leave the European Union. And we respected that. I'm telling you that over 70% want a law put in place saying that cash must be accepted. Why should 71% be ignored when 52% had their wishes respected? So I do think here you have to make a choice. You either let certain businesses dictate. Not every business. There are some brilliant businesses with cash. Tesco, our biggest retailer, are superb with cash. Not only do they accept cash, but 17% of all the cash in the country comes out of ATMs at Tesco stores. Without companies like Tesco and Sainsbury's and other big retailers actually having ATMs, we would be bereft of cash because the banks have taken out most of their ATMs and closed their branches.
Right, well, I'll agree with that. But it's easier for Tesco's to have to cope with all that cash, all the stuff that comes with cash. You know, you've got to have a float in each till. You've got to have security to take the takings to the bank and all that. Tesco's, the biggest retailer in the land, it's easy for them. But for somebody who's running, you know, a coffee shop, something like that, then it's much more difficult for them because they'd have to take their own time to go after work. They'd have to pay money for security that comes with having a lot of cash on the premises and so on. It's kind of like insisting that a coffee store has to have oat milk as a choice by law. Well, they don't have to.
It's not at all like that.
It is. And if a customer wants oat milk and that outlet isn't selling it, then they'll go somewhere else. That's their choice. It should be up to the business how they conduct their business.
You're saying that small businesses would prefer to use cash for the reasons that you give. I go all around the country. I visit small villages, small towns, communities all around the country, and no small business have I found that wants to stop accepting cash. Some of them feel pressurised into it, but because the banks have closed and they have nowhere to deposit cash. The banks have closed and they'll know where to get their till floats.
Right.
But that is being imposed on them. The coffee shops that aren't accepting cash are big chains like Black Sheep or chains like Gales in the cake and snack industry. It's not the small people.
But what about the problem that you just highlighted? Where are they going to take their takings if they, A, don't want to keep it under the mattress in their home for obvious reasons, and B, the banks have closed down the branches, so they have nowhere to put it?
Well, we've got things like bank hubs. that we're opening, and we have worked out with a very careful analysis of the UK that we need 1,200 bank hubs around the country. So every community with more than 5,000 residents has somewhere where, for example, businesses can go and collect their cash. We already have a network of 11,000 post offices. If the post offices are given proper contracts by the banks, they can have automated cash acceptance from businesses and make it a very efficient thing for post offices to take over the role of banks.
So until
there are solutions to all of this.
Of course,
the truth
yes,
is,
I understand
the
that.
public want those solutions.
But if
small
those
businesses want them,
all right.
but we're being dictated to by the financial services industry, and we're being told you can't have that because you're British and you don't deserve what the French have got, the Spanish have got, the Danes have got, the Belgians have got, the Swedish have got, the Norwegians have got.
Yeah, that's not why. I'm sure I haven't got the stats in front of me, but I'm sure that we are much more a card-based society than all of the ones that you've just mentioned.
What?
And
we're not,
it's not being imposed.
Sweden?
It's not being
Sweden and Norway. That's complete nonsense. Like, I do have the statistics in front of me. These countries are dominated by cards, but they still have laws that say in Norway you must accept cash because they believe the public have rights. And what we're being told is, no, you don't have rights because you're British. Mustn't grumble. Let's be dictated to. But the public have had enough of that. Okay. We're not being dictated to.
All right. Do you think our relationship with cash changed during COVID? Are people less inclined to want to touch it?
No. People dying to touch cash because they know that there's no problem touching cash. Of course, people's relationship with cash changed because half of the high street was closed down and you had to order things on the internet. So internet sales went up to, I think it was 38% of total retail sales. But they've gone down again. People don't want to live conducting all their lives through their letterboxes. People like to get out and do things and socialise in coffee shops, most of which, by the way, still accept cash. So, yes, of course, during COVID, there were many changes, but not irreversible changes. Many people didn't travel abroad. Most people didn't travel abroad during COVID, but they're going back to doing it again now, just like cash use has increased every year for the last 3 years. So, people want to paint the picture that cash is dying out, but those people are people that make money through cash dying out. The public, who just want something to be accepted because they think it should be their choice, do not want cash to die out. And we have got all the proof. And we also know, by the way, we surveyed Labour MPs before the last election. 70% of Labour MPs said they wanted a law put in place, and we now have a Labour government. So we're pressing that government to honour what their MPs want and to honour what 40 million adults in this country want, a payment choice law which protects their right to use cash when and where they choose.
Right. But we've already established that the smallest businesses all take cash. That's what you told me. And
many small businesses still take cash. Not all, but most,
yeah. And the biggest businesses take cash, the supermarkets that we just talked about. So the ones that are the problem are a few chains of coffee stores. Well,
no, it's not a few chains of coffee stores. There's restaurant chains, there's some pubs, but also it's becoming a problem with transport undertakings. Kate Osborne, the MP, don't just listen to me, Kate Osborne, the MP for Jarrow, was saying, you travel on a train, you can't buy a cup of tea because they only accept cards. Car parks now, app only. Museums, not taking cash. Theatres not taking cash. Leisure centres, which are owned by local authorities, not accepting cash. It's a creeping problem. We don't say it's everywhere now in terms of every business or every organisation like leisure centre operators, but it's a creeping problem that we need to hit on the head. And the great news for this government is it costs the government absolutely nothing to hit this on the head and give the public what they want. You should be able to buy a cup of tea in the train. You should be able to have a swim at a leisure centre. You should be able to use a theatre without having to resort to apps and cards.
Would you take that to the extent of vending machines and parking meters?
Well, car parking definitely is a huge problem now because they have gone so far towards app-only parking. So, yes, I would insist on car parking actually accepting cash. And in fact, the government agree with that. We had a letter from a government minister saying that car parks at railway stations, they would insist that they accepted cash, because you can use cash to buy a railway ticket, but if you can't park at the station, well, that's pretty useless, isn't it? If you're not allowed to use cash to do that parking.
Well, my memory of vending machines and parking meters that take only cash is that they never used to work. But if you pay by card, no problem.
Well, if they'd never used to work, Nick, they'd all have gone out of business. And they obviously didn't, because we had thousands, if not millions, of vending machines. So, yeah, there are these apocryphal stories, they never worked. But the truth is, most of them did work. That's why they existed. But, of course, it's very convenient for the card companies and the app providers to say, this is much better. It'll always work. I have gone to so many machines which are card only where the card reader's not working. How does that help the public?
Just finally, as we've established, the finance industry, the banks, they want rid of cash, and they usually get what they want. Are you not fighting a losing battle?
I don't fight losing battles, because it's not Ron Delnevo fighting this battle for Ron Delnevo. It's 40 million of the British public, 71% have told us they want this law to protect their right to use cash. I stand for the public, and those who argue against the public interest and what the public want must be defeated. Otherwise, what's the point of calling this a democracy? What's the point of going on? The public must have their way. The public's wish to carry on using cash must be respected, Nick. That's what I believe.
Very good to talk to you, Ron. Thanks very much for that. Ron Delnevo, chair of the Payment Choice Alliance. So, what do you think? Should it be in law that any business must accept cash? Or is how they get paid more... is it more reasonable to allow a business to decide how it gets paid? Essentially, if you want to pay cash and they don't take cash, then you take your business somewhere else. 0345 6060 973 LBC. Stubbington. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Nick. As you know, I've got cerebral palsy, so I use cash all the time, because with my condition, I regularly snap and break the card. So I get cash out through the post office and then spend cash in. But I'm now excluded from my local council leisure centre because they refuse to accept cash. And since that's happened, since COVID, my condition has got worse because I can't go and swim there anymore, and I'm not welcome with my cash.
Blimey, have you told anybody about this?
I've written to the local councillor, I've written to councillors, I've written to a news reporter for another organisation, and they're just sticking to their guns saying they say it's speeded up queues, and that since COVID happened, they had no intention of going back to cash.
Well, that doesn't seem very fair.
Well, I've been going there since 1986, and then suddenly I'm no longer welcome. I've got the money. I don't have a smartphone because, again, I can't use it. And it's why when I go to the post office to get cash out, the lady handles it for me, puts the thing. I went to them and said, can you do my card for me? They said, we're not allowed to touch your card. So they said, you have to do it yourself. I was like, I've got a method of payment. You just won't accept it. And I bet I'm not the only disabled person out there in this sort of a problem since COVID.
Well, that seems extraordinary to me. And this other reporter that you contacted, did they actually run with this story?
Yes, they did.
And what was the response?
The response from the council was, you wait for it. They said, we found it cuts down queues. I kid you not.
Well...
in fact, when I go back to your personal affair, I'll tell them so you can look up the report so you can watch it.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear all that, Chris, and I do wish you the very best. I really hope that they manage to find a way. It doesn't seem beyond the wit of man to find a way to sort that problem. But I wish you all the best, Chris. Thanks for that.